Last time we looked at all the neutral cards, and it is time to finish the job. 27 class cards. We've taken a look at a couple of them in the last episode, so definitely check that out. But other than that, let's get started. Good morning, everyone. My name is Rooster, and these are all of the class cards in Karazhan. First of all, let's get started by checking out the Mage cards. We've already seen one of them, but first let's take a look at Babbling Book. So it's a 1 mana 1/1 minion that is not very spectacular overall, but it does have a battle cry of add a random mage spell to your hand. So how good is a random mage spell? Well, not every single deck will be interested in a card like this. I can definitely predict that much, because, well, mage spells are usually pretty situational. So you can't count on this card giving you the right answer in the right circumstance. However, if you have a spell-focused deck, then this might actually be a fine card, because getting a card as well as a 1/1 on the board is not terrible, and for a card that is useful early, it is also not terrible late game, so that is definitely an advantage for something like this. I would say any deck that includes Kabbalist Tome might also be interested in a card like this, but definitely not for everyone. Freeze Mage won't like this. Tempo Mage probably doesn't like this. So something like a Reno Mage, something like a Value Mage, or just a fun card altogether. I'm looking forward to the voiceovers, by the way. So next card, Medivh's Valet, we already checked out in the last episode, so I won't waste too many words on that anymore. And Firelands Portal, 7 mana, 5 damage, and summon a random 5-cost minion. Well, what is a 5-cost minion? Let's go check that out, shall we? On the negative side, we have a few rotten eggs, like Big Game Hunter, Starving Buzzard. There can be some rather poor statted minions that have battle cries that you won't get any benefit of. The average minion you'll get from this will be somewhere in the ballpark of a 4/5. Sometimes it will have an upside, like a situational death rattle, something like stealth, or You'll definitely get something worthwhile, but something that is definitely not worth paying 5 mana for, probably. So there aren't too many insane things, but also not too many disastrous things, aside from just a small minion in general. And even if you get a 3/3 minion with a battle cry of deal 5 damage, you're still not too upset, because usually you'll cast a spell whenever you have something that's worth dealing 5 damage to. So I could definitely see this card, for example, replacing the Faceless Summoner card from Whispers of the Old Gods, which was generally ran in Tempo Mage as sort of a value thing, something to do on the later turns, something to give value against the more mid-rangey decks. And this does basically... well, it does it better, because it gives you a reasonably sized body. It can be a little disappointing sometimes, but it also can be a little above average sometimes. So that is also fine. And it has some immediate impact on the board, and that is the thing about Faceless Summoner that I generally disliked when played in a Tempo Mage deck. So could definitely see this being very valuable in a deck like that. As well as of course being a spell, and thus boosting your Yogg-Saron further, boosting your Arcane Giants a little further. So can definitely see this card being quite good. And of course, I wouldn't be talking about Arena much, but this card is pretty much one of the best cards you can possibly draft. So Mage will be pretty good. Anyways, 1 down, 8 to go. Let's look at Priest. So Priest has Priest of the Feast, which is... we've already talked about this card, but for now let's take a look at Onyx Bishop, which is a 5 mana creature 3/4, which is really small for what you're paying for it, but you do get to summon a friendly minion that died this game whenever it comes into play. So how good is that? If you build your deck around a card like this, then it can definitely have some value. So if you combine it with an Injured Blazemaster, for example, that is the prime target for a card like this, then you're getting a 5 mana 3/4 plus a 4/7, which is kind of ridiculous. But the caveat here, of course, is that you can't have too many early game minions, because otherwise your Onyx Bishop value, just like the Resurrect value, is going downhill pretty fast. If this card summons a Loot Hoarder, you're still not incredibly upset, but you're only getting a 5/5 in stats, and you're getting to draw a card. It's acceptable, but it's absolutely the bare minimum. You can't run this card in a Dragon deck and reanimate Twilight Whelps or Wormrest agents, because then it's just not pulling its weight. So, not really a fit for the Dragon Priest deck. Not really a fit for the Control Priest deck, because they're rather reliant on their Doomsayers and Wild Pyromancers and Northshire Clerics. Not really a fit for the N'Zoth, although I guess if you cut some of your early minions in a N'Zoth deck, then I guess Onyx Bishop might actually be pretty good, because if you reanimate a Death Rattle with this, of course you're getting an extra minion whenever you N'Zoth later, so could still be pretty decent. But I would be looking at either a build with Injured Blade Masters for it, or of course a more N'Zoth build. And finally, you've probably heard enough about this card already, but we have Purify. Purify is a 2-mana spell that silences a friendly minion and draws a card. So there has been much controversy about this card. Basically, it's kind of a wonky card. It can't be too useful, it can't be too good, because if you would cut a mana from this card, then Priest would get an additional 1-mana cycle card, a 1-mana card that draws a card, and that would be problematic down the line when a combo Priest might just run a lot of cycling cards, run through its deck really quickly, which leads to a playstyle that Blizzard doesn't really want to enforce right now. So I can see why this card isn't better than it is. The outcry from the community, of course, is about why did this card get printed when Priest is basically considered one of the worst classes in the game right now, and that might just have been an oversight from the development team, unfortunately. It's definitely not the card Priest needs right now. But we're hoping that Priest of the Feast, as well as some of the neutral cards, might at least leave Priest with one viable deck on the ladder. I'm hoping for Dragon Priest to work quite decently in the next few weeks. So looking at that, perhaps a more spell-focused Priest deck that has been resurfacing as of lately. Perhaps N'Zoth Priest gets some new useful tools. We'll have to see about that, but Purify, it's basically, even in a deck that aims to make use of it, it's not going to pull its weight. Next up, we're looking at the Warlock cards. First of all, there is Malchezaar's Imp. Names are hard, guys, don't judge me. We have a 1-mana 1/3 demon with the ability, whenever you discard a card, draw a card. Now this is a really, really powerful effect if you look for parallels in other card games. In Hearthstone, discarding a card always means that you are discarding a random card from your hand, which means that discarding a card with Soulfire or with Doomguard, perhaps even with Succubus, is quite a high cost, and the card you draw might not be worth as much as the card you're actually discarding. Plus the fact that if you keep discarding cards, you'll eventually start running out of cards in your deck. But that doesn't leave this card in too bad a spot, I believe, because if you add your Soulfires, your Fist of Jaraxxuses, your Doomguards to a deck with Malchezaar's Imp, and then basically just build a zoo-ish Warlock shell around it, you can definitely get your worth out of this card. Casting a Soulfire with a Malchezaar's Imp on the board has to feel pretty good, I can imagine. And we can't really judge this card without looking at the next one, which is Silverware Golem, a 3-mana 3/3 minion, with the ability, if you discard this minion, summon it. So that is an auto-include in the same deck. We're not quite sure whether a card like Succubus might be worth running, whether Fist of Jaraxxus is good enough to include, whether you even want to go all the way and get your tiny Knights of Evil in on the party. But Silverware Golem has just the right amount of payoff for a deck to consider running this Malchezaar's Imp and perhaps some other discard cards. All in all, I can definitely see discard Warlock being a thing, and it will definitely be experimented with, and we'll have to see whether viability is where it needs to be. But I'm certainly excited to try it out. Final Warlock card is Karazhan, a 5-mana spell which summons a 1/1 candle, a 2/2 broom, and a 3/3 teapot. So overall, not very exciting. You can pretty much compare this card with, for example, Silverhand Knight, which is a 4/4 minion that summons a 2/2 token. One can argue which one of the two will be better. It'll differ based on the situation, I can imagine, but does Warlock need a card like this when they already have Forbidden Ritual available to them? The answer is maybe, because a card like this is more resilient against Whirlwind effects. I wouldn't see this card being played in Zoo-style Warlocks immediately. One idea that people have been toying around with is including this in a Reno deck along with Cho'Gall and some expensive Warlock spells. And casting this on turn 7 along with a 7/7 for 7 has to feel pretty good. That is pretty much an army in a can right away. And while you are paying 5 life for the privilege, that is a pretty big threat that has to be dealt with immediately. So I can see where people are coming from, and we'll have to see whether it's just a cute thing or that it will be actually good enough to consider. But last of all, the best excuse to play this card in your deck, of course, is just to appreciate the fine art that the design team has done on a card like this, and I'm really hoping for some awesome voiceovers. How can you resist? On to Druid. Druid gets a couple of beasts that are pretty exciting to consider for a Beast Druid deck, which has been teetering on the edge of viability for the past few months. It's definitely a deck to consider even without the new cards. So a few new additions should definitely bring the deck up to comparable levels with the rest of the field, I feel. First of all, Enchanted Raven, 1-mana 2/2 beast. So a 1-mana 2/2 hasn't been seen before. Of course, we have seen a 1-mana 2/3 in Zombie Chow, which is a different kind of animal altogether. First of all, it's a zombie and not a beast, but Enchanted Raven in the Druid class, of course, opens the windows to turn 1 Enchanted Raven, turn 2 Mark of Yashiraj for a 4/4 that's attacking on turn 2. That seems pretty sweet, and you even get to draw a card for the privilege. So that's pretty good. Is it good enough for... Well, it will probably be good enough, but a 2/2 for 1 might just not do a whole lot in the current environment. The only 1-drops, the only 1-mana minions that are seeing play right now either have some additional effect when they're played or are 1/3 minions. A 1-mana 2/2 is just unprecedented, and we'll have to see just how good it is. There's no question that Beast Druid will run this card. The main reason to think about Beast Druid, in my opinion, is the next card, Menagerie Warden, 6-mana 5/5 minion, Battle Cry, choose a friendly beast and summon a copy of it. So people's minds have immediately raced to their ultimate scenario of playing a 5-mana Strangleturn Tiger into a turn 6, or, well, we're playing Druid, so let's say turn 4 Strangleturn Tiger and turn 5 Menagerie Warden, giving 3 5/5 minions on the board. of which one can attack immediately. That seems pretty sweet, doesn't it? And stealth, of course, means that it can be quite hard for your opponent to actually prevent a play like this. You can compare it to, for example, Houndmaster, where actually killing off the hunter's beast is quite viable if you suspect he has a Houndmaster in hand. But if you suspect a Druid is sitting on a Menagerie Warden in hand, you can't really kill off all his beasts, especially if he's including tigers in his deck. And Druid beasts are also quite durable. For example, a Druid of the Claw. When a Druid of the Claw hits the board, it can be pretty hard to properly deal with it in preparation for a Menagerie Warden hitting the field. Of course, we are talking about a 6-mana card in quite an aggressive deck, but I do think the payoff is definitely there. It's not quite on the level of Call the Wild, I think, although Druid does have a generally higher quality set of minions than the Hunter has to its availability. So, yeah, Beast Druid is definitely a force to be reckoned with in the next few weeks, I believe. And finally, the last Druid card, also 6 mana, Moonglade Portal. Restore 6 health and summon a random 6-cost minion. Well, how good is this card? First of all, we can immediately see that for 6 mana we're actually getting a 6-cost minion. Of course, you don't always get 6 mana worth of minions out of your 6 mana, but you do get to heal for 6 in addition, and worst comes to worst, that's going to be a heal 6 on your hero, which is not terrible. But first of all, 6 mana minions can be pretty bad. There are some rotten eggs in here, certainly. We have Kidnapper, we have Corrupted Seer. But there's a lot of 6 mana minions, and most of them are actually pretty decent, and there are some pretty above the curve exceptions, such as a Sylvanas, a Sunwalker, a Cairn Bloodhoof. There are plenty of pretty worthwhile minions to gain when you get a random 6-cost minion. Best of all, besides just getting poor stats on your minions, there is nothing particularly disastrous, and most of the time you will be pretty happy with the result, as long as you're not expecting 6 mana worth of value. But for example, 5 mana worth of value, a minion worth 5 mana, and then for 1 extra mana you get to heal for 6. So that's overall pretty useful, and you can even use it to heal a minion that has just received some damage. So overall, this seems like a pretty good card and is an obvious inclusion in the more spell-focused Druid decks, in my opinion. So we can definitely expect to see some of this card. I won't immediately call it a 2-off in decks like that, but Druids can be pretty happy with what they got so far. Moving on to the Rogue minions. First of all, Deadly Fork. 3 mana, 3/2 minion, death rattle, add a 3/2 weapon to your hand. So let's take a look at the weapon. The weapon is a Sharp Fork, which is a 3 mana, 3/2 weapon. So a 3 mana, 3/2 weapon it doesn't look too exciting immediately. But when you start thinking about it, we do have Fiery War Axe as a 2 mana 3/2 weapon, but plenty of classes have been playing 3 mana 3/2 weapons and have been pretty happy with it. For example, we have Eaglehorn Bow in Hunter, we have Power Mace in Shaman, we have, King's Defender in Warrior hasn't seen too much play because, well, obviously it has some competition. And there is the Paladin weapon, the 3/2 that buffs a Divine Shield minion. Most of those classes are pretty happy, basically not making any use of the text on the card, and just playing a 3 mana 3/2 weapon. Now, of course, we're talking about a Rogue class here, and Rogue already has a weapon to its availability, a 2 mana 1/2 weapon. But you can basically see the Deadly Fork as a deadly poison, which doesn't require you to weapon up, but instead costs 2 more. A little worse than a deadly poison, because of course it's not a spell, but let's call it a card that's just slightly worse than a deadly poison. Would you play a 3 mana 3/2 Death Rattle, draw a card? I think Rogue would be pretty happy with that. Of course it doesn't stack as well. If you have 2 Deadly Forks, then you won't be playing your Sharp Forks anytime soon, probably. But the Sharp Fork is better than people are giving it credit for, I think. And a 3 mana 3/2 draw a card seems like a pretty excellent minion to me. So people have been looking down on this card, and I think they might be pleasantly surprised. So for the next row cards, let's look at Swashburglar. 1 mana 1/1 minion, it's a pirate. And for its battle cry, it adds a random class card to your hand from your opponent's class. So we've seen this mechanic before in the Undercity Huckster, as well as the Burgle card. Well, one of those cards has been a little more successful than the other, but the same as the Babbling Book for the Mage, a 1 mana minion that draws a card is actually pretty good value. Of course, the random class card from your opponent is going to be pretty random, but usually you'll get some worth out of it, and being a pirate is not all that amazingly relevant for a rogue, but it's certainly there if you want to build a pirate rogue deck, then this is definitely an inclusion, I think. And being a 1/1 minion is also not irrelevant, because like the Mage, you can combine the hit from a 1/1 minion with your hero power to deal 2 damage to something. So that is definitely something to consider. The Mage and Rogue will be generally happier with a 1 mana 1/1 minion that draws a card than other classes may be, just because their hero power makes the 1 damage from the minion that much more relevant. So overall, pretty good card, and let's also consider the next card, because that might have some influence. We have a 5 mana 5/6 minion, Ethereal Peddler. Battlecry, reduce the cost of cards in your hand from other classes by 2 mana. So what are the ways to get cards in your hand from other classes? Well, first of all, there's the Swashburglar, obviously. There's the Undercity Huckster that we've mentioned. There's Burgle. Burgle hasn't been too popular, but if Ethereal Peddler is a thing, then I'm expecting at least 1 Burgle in the deck. And there's some oddball cards, like you can gang up a creature from your opponent, or you can play Nefarian to get 2 cards from your opponent's class. So those can be ways to get cards from other classes in your hand. And if you play this card, it's a 5 mana 5/6 by itself. It's not terrible. But people haven't really been playing Pit Fighter in Constructed. And for example, Rogues did have the Shadowpan, the combo minion, what's its name again? Shadowpan Rider? Shadowpan something. At the very least, Rogue really isn't interested in these really big minions. They want their cards to be versatile, or immediate tempo advantage when they play their minions. So, unless you can reliably hit at least 1 card with this, I don't expect this to be a thing. Well, people have been saying this even before the Swashbuckler was spoiled, but I do think just 1 more card that is actually viable to play in a rogue deck, which adds random class cards to your hand, might just tilt this card over from being kinda meh to something that is definitely worth including. So at the moment I don't really see the Peddler being quite there yet, but it's definitely something to consider for the future, because this card has a really powerful effect. Keep in mind though that if you're playing against another rogue, this card will be basically blank, because none of the cards you're getting will actually get you any discounts. Next up there's Hunter. First card is Kindly Grandmother. 2 mana 1/1 minion with Death Rattle, summon a 3/2 big bad wolf. Most notably, we have a 2 mana Death Rattle minion that summons another minion, and both sides of the equation here are actually beasts. So that is quite relevant in the case of Hunter, because they love having access to something that basically guarantees that they have a beast on the board come turn 4. Or come late game when they want to kill command something, usually your opponent's face. But yeah, Hunters have been running quite a variety of 2 mana minions lately. They've been running Flame Jugglers, Huge Toads, King's Alex, Knife Jugglers, but none of those have been really too exciting so far. And the power level of Kindly Grandmother is definitely up there. Of course, your opponent is never going to be really that interested in killing off the 1/1 unless they immediately have an answer to the resulting 3/2 minion. But actually having an attack value compared to a card like Nerubian Egg means that it will never be really that hard to get your 3-2 value out of this. Of course, the cards can also function quite nicely as some kind of board wipe protection, because if a Paladin consecrates your board and you get a 3-2 afterwards, and you can Houndmaster the 3-2 and hit him in the face for 5, that sounds pretty reasonable. So Kindly Grandmother's looking like a very good card, and we'll be seeing a lot of this in basically any type of Hunter deck, I believe. Next card is Cloaked Huntress. We've talked about this card in the last episode, so go check that one out if you wonder what my opinion on that one is. We will take a look at the new Hunter secret called Cat Trick. It's secret. After your opponent casts a spell, summon a 4/2 Panther with Stealth. Is this a good secret? Well, there's a question. It is good enough, it is competitive enough, that your opponent will have to wonder whether you have a Cat Trick on the field. And it will make it a little tougher to actually check for Hunter secrets, because unlike something like Dart Trap, basically nobody ever has run Dart Trap, except for perhaps some Lock and Load Hunters. But even then, Dart Trap just hasn't been good enough. So people never really keep it in mind, and it's not worth playing around Dart Trap. I do think it will be worth playing around Cat Trick. So, for example, if you're a mage and you're playing against a hunter, it will be worthwhile to check to cast a spell before casting your board wipe to see whether you can kill the panther along with your board wipe. Because if you're a mage and you're casting a Flame Strike and then your opponent gets a 4/2 minion, that would be a bit of a shame, and the 4/2 minion is a bit of a pain to deal with because it has stealth. So it's definitely worth playing around. That's the first thing. And if it's worth playing around, then it's probably worth playing at least occasionally. So at first we'll probably only see this in spell-focused hunter decks. It's not quite on the level of Freezing Trap, but I think it's definitely as good as Bear Trap, perhaps even as good as Explosive Trap, something like that. So for the next class, Shaman, we've already looked at both of the common Shaman cards, so take a look at the last episode if you would like to know my opinions there. We will shortly talk about Maelstrom Portal, which is a 2-mana Shaman spell, deal 1 damage to all enemy minions and then summon a random 1-cost minion. So this is basically a better Arcane Explosion. Is that a bad thing? I don't know. It's a different class, so mages already have quite a lot of ways to deal with 1 health enemy minions, aside from their hero power even. And shamans have been lacking in that area. I do think this is a worthwhile addition to the Shaman arsenal. I don't know whether Shamans really needed it, but if your opponent has a board full of 1 health minions, then Shamans always felt a bit down on their luck, because, well, you would like to Lightning Storm it, but that would set you back 3 mana for this turn, and then an additional 2 mana for the next turn. So in that case, a Maelstrom Portal would be quite excellent. But this card does summon a 1-cost minion. What does a 1-cost minion mean? What do you expect from a 1-mana minion? Basically, you're expecting to get a 1/1, perhaps something a little better, but you're never going to get anything worse than a 1/1 minion. And if you're getting a 1/1 minion along with your Arcane Explosion, it's probably already fine. So anything above a 1/1 minion is going to be good. So there are various 1/3 minions, there are various 2/1 minions, and there's even a 2/2 minion right now. So that makes me think this card could actually be quite good. It is also fairly consistent, as long as you're not hoping for miracles. You can't expect to get something with 2 power, and you can't expect something with more than 1 toughness. But usually you will be pretty happy with what you're getting here. You'll always just play this for the 1 damage to all enemy minions, and not really for the minion anyway. It also works great with spell power, so any Shaman deck that already ran 2 Azure Drakes, and perhaps even a Blood Mage Stelmos will be pretty happy with this spell, I can imagine. So overall, perhaps it's not the most amazing card in mid-range Shaman decks or aggro Shaman decks, but any spell-focused Shaman deck will be pretty happy with this, such as Control Shamans or Malygos Shamans. And perhaps it can sneak its way into some mid-range Shaman decks, because Lightning Storm can be pretty expensive, and if there's enough Zoo-type decks on the ladder, then this card can be a pretty good counter, I think. Let's move on towards the Paladin class. First, there is the Nightbane Templar. We've already talked about this minion in the last episode, so let's not dwell too long on that. Aside from me just saying that Dragon Paladin is looking like it might be a thing, so let's keep that in mind. Next we have Ivory Knight, which is a 6 mana 4/4 minion. Well, that doesn't seem too exciting, does it? Well, you would expect something like drawing a card or restoring some health, and that is exactly what this card does, because it discovers a spell and then restores health to your hero equal to its cost. So it's basically somewhere between an Azure Drake and an Antique Heal bot, and both of those are excellent cards in the right situation. Besides, discovering a spell might just give you the perfect spell for the current situation, or at least the best spell out of 3 in your current situation, which means that a lot of the randomness is actually negated here. I should mention that a lot of Paladin spells are actually 1 cost or less, so there could be situations in which you're hoping to just get a lot of healing out of this card, and the game isn't cooperating by just giving you a 1, a 1, and a 3, for example. So you'll have to make a decision. Do you immediately need the bigger amount of healing right now? Do you select the ultimate card for the ultimate situation coming up? There will be plenty of interesting choices to be made, and even if you get a choice of 3 secrets, at least you get to pick the most appropriate secret in the current situation. This is not a card that you would run in an aggressive Paladin deck, and an Azoth Paladin might just not have the room for a card like this. It really needs its Death Rattle minions, it needs its Doomsayers, its healing cards, and this card might just not be reliable enough. But maybe in a mid-range Paladin deck, or perhaps even a Dragon Paladin deck, I could definitely see this card being played, if only as a one-off, but this card definitely has some potential, because discovering a spell is worth quite a bit more than just adding a random spell to your hand. Let's not underestimate that. And finally, we have Silvermoon Portal. 4 mana, give a minion +2/+2, and then summon a random 2-cost minion. Let's take a closer look at what a random 2-cost minion will be. So there are some pretty bad situations where you get a random 2-cost minion. Most of all, something like Doomsayer or Longwalker Cho. And on the upside, we of course have something like a Totem Golem, a Succubus, a Millhouse Manastorm. So the upside is a pretty big minion for the mana you're paying for it. But let's keep in mind that you're actually paying 4 mana for a random 2-cost minion. I would say the random 2-cost minion is probably worth 1.5 mana. Let's be generous. And then we give a minion +2/+2. That's the good part about this card. Because you get to immediately attack with the minion that you're giving +2/+2. So hopefully you're getting a decent trade out of it. But overall, this card is very swingy, and I would probably not recommend playing it over more consistent buffs like Blessing of Kings or even Seal of Champions. And finally, the warrior cards. We have Fool's Bane, which is a 5 mana 3/4 weapon. Which sounds a little bit like Assassin's Blade, which is also a 5 mana 3/4 weapon, so that's not entirely coincidental. But this one can attack an unlimited amount of times each turn, but cannot attack your opponent directly. So that is a really interesting text line. It is pretty much unlike anything we've ever seen before. And allows you to immediately get rid of a lot of your opponent's minions, but at quite the hefty health cost. Well, health cost is something that a warrior is usually not too worried about, so that's definitely something. But in order to, for example, get rid of even a 4/4 minion, you're taking 8 damage. And that can be quite a lot. People have thought the same way about Cursed Blade, for example. Getting rid of a 3/2 minion with a Cursed Blade takes 6 damage to the face, then getting rid of another minion, take another 6, and then probably hitting your opponent in the face with the last charge. Well, of course you won't take any damage if you don't want to with the Fool's Bane, but you'd better make some good use of this card when you're including it in your deck. I don't know whether it's good enough for Constructed. But it's definitely a card you're looking forward to seeing when you're playing Warrior in the arena, that's for sure. Of course, this card is a very good combination with the new 3-mana minion, Violet Illusionist, which makes your hero immune during your own turn. So that means you're not taking any damage from attacking enemy minions with your weapon. So that means if you're playing a Fool's Bane with a Violet Illusionist on the table, you just get to deal 12 damage to your opponent's board. That sounds pretty great. But whether that's good enough to see play in Constructed remains to be seen. It might just be a little too cute. Next card is Protect the King. 3 mana for each enemy minion, summon a 1/1 pawn with Taunt. So this immediately invokes visions of Unleash the Hounds, which also spawns a 1/1 minion for every enemy minion on the board. But this one is much more defensive-minded, but does a pretty decent job of blocking your opponent's board. It's basically kind of a Frost Nova effect, but if your opponent has other ways of getting rid of your 1/1 pawns, of course he can actually still do some damage with his minions to your face. It is a very, very defensive card. Aside from possible combo potential with Bolster, for example, that is a pretty nice combo, but both Bolster and Protect the King are pretty situational cards, so I don't really see that combination being that viable. It can be pretty funny, I will admit, but Protect the King might just find a use in more combo-oriented warrior decks, because they basically give you an extra turn. And that is all that combo decks are looking for, really. Perhaps the really defensive-oriented Cthulhu Warriors could find a use for this card. Overall, it's not very efficient, but it's a really interesting idea, and I appreciate the card for that. And finally, we have Ironforge Portal. A 5-mana spell, gain 4 armor, and summon a random 4-cost minion. Well, we've seen cards like this before, so let's take a look at random 4-cost minions, shall we? On 4 mana, we have some pretty bad statted minions. We have the Faceless Shambler, for example, which is just a 1/1 if you don't get the Battlecry effect. We have the 7/7 Eerie Statue, which unfortunately can't attack, so you might not be too happy seeing that one. On the flip side, we have some pretty good statted minions, like a 5/6 or a 7/7. But again, like the 2-mana minions, these are very, very swingy. Overall, you're expected to get somewhere in the ballpark of 3 mana worth of minions on the board, but the results might vary wildly. And if we then take a look at the card by itself, we're paying 5 mana for a 3-mana minion and then gaining a little bit of armor, which may sound a little bit like Shield Maiden, but Shield Maiden had the advantage of being very consistent. It is always a 5/5 worth of a minion, and you get a decent chunk of armor, which lets you combine it with a Shield Slam, for example. And while that still applies to Ironforge Portal, you can still combine it with a Hero Power and a Shield Slam, for example. The minion you're getting is just too inconsistent to, I think, see play in warrior decks. Alright, so that is all the cards in One Night in Karazhan. I hope you've enjoyed my perspective on these cards. Hopefully it may have helped you make up your mind on whether or not you're interested in purchasing the adventure. Do expect my views on whether the adventure is worth it to come out pretty soon, after I've had my time with the expansion, of course. Do hope you'll enjoy your time in Karazhan. I know I will. I'm looking forward to playing with a lot of these cards, and we'll certainly have some fun with it. If you agree or disagree with any of my opinions on these cards, please do let me know in the comments below, and we'll have a little chat about it. And do check my channel for regular Hearthstone content. And as always, have a great day, everyone, and I will see you next time.